Hello everyone, my name is Akal and I am a somatic therapist. If you'd like to find out a little bit about what I do, you can check out my video, which I have posted down below this video. So what I want to talk about today is, I'm kind of continuing along a series of videos that I've done dealing with men's, sexual challenges. So I run a men's group, and the men's group has about 1,000 members at this point. And it's an interesting group that when I originally set up this group, I set it up primarily because I knew that, men needed a place. Men needed a place to express themselves, to explore closeness, intimacy, and again, not necessarily sexual interaction, but intimacy. So a lot of my events are actually very intimate. They're nude events. A lot of them involve touch, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this is generally non-sexual touch. So doing all this work over the last 5 or 6 years, I've developed a certain understanding of male sexual energy. And one of the things that I found particularly surprising is that men were coming to me with the same issues over and over and over and over again. And what I found most surprising was the age range of these men, specifically with the topic I'm going to cover today, which is erectile dysfunction. So erectile dysfunction, the statistics going back in the 1960s indicated that the occurrence was it was generally rare for men under the age of 40 to be experiencing challenges with their ability to get an erection. However, it's relatively common now for men under the age of 40 to experience challenges, and there's a number of things we can blame, but I don't want to go into the victim thing here. What I want to kind of focus on is what are the causes, the possible causes. And again, I don't know any of these things for certain. I would have to speak to each individual man in order to determine what are the root causes. However, I've found that the cause of erectile dysfunction in many men is usually related to one of 6 different things. And so with each one of these 6 different possibilities, there is 6 different potential, I won't call them, healers, but we'll say recommendations that somebody could follow that might help them, get their little fella hard again. So going over the sort of, what are the 6 possible negative, the 6 possible things that could lead to erectile dysfunction. So primarily, and again, this is from seeing multiple men, I've dealt with a lot of men with this particular issue, but primarily there's always stress. It's modern life. Stress is, it can do so much to you, but mainly what I find that stress is, at least in most circumstances, is due to these men being fatigued. And if the body is fatigued energetically, there's not a lot of energy to go towards sex drive. So that's stress. Secondarily, I see a lot of trauma. Men who've had been raped. Yes, men get raped. Men who've been molested when they were younger. Again, these can build up a lot of psychological baggage around the energy that is associated with the genitals. And so, again, it's really important for these men to be able to resolve that. And I'll get into the resolutions when I get into, my cure-alls. So then we have body image. So mind-body connection is incredibly important here. This was something I found most shocking. When I first set up the men's group, I was just absolutely shocked at the number of men who were just like uncomfortable in their own skin. And again, I never thought about body image as being a male issue. But again, if I reflect in retrospect of my own, through my own life, I worked out a tremendous amount in my 20s, lifting a lot of weights. And if I really, really am honest with myself and I reflect on it, it was largely negative motivation. I was motivated by vanity. I was motivated by insecurity. So I figured if I augment the way I look, then somehow, I would ultimately accept myself more. And it wasn't that I was looking for acceptance from others necessarily. I mean, that's definitely part of it. It's just that what I needed in order to accept myself was validation from the other person. So body image issues, it could be penis size insecurities, any of a number of things that could come up and trigger issues around body image. The other thing that I would say that would create this situation around body image issues is if you've had insensitive lovers. You know, a lover who says, oh, your penis could be thicker or it could be longer, or you know, an insensitive lover who, you know, pokes fun at your belly. Any of these things. And the problem is that some men handle this, they're very resilient, and they handle these kinds of comments really lightly. And unfortunately, the men who handle this very lightly are the ones who are usually also doling it out. So men, if you're, you know, engaged sexually with a man or a woman, please be cognizant of the fact that the person may be very sensitive. Don't make disparaging comments about the person's body. It's not serving you nor the other person. You're just wasting your breath. So anyway, body image, major problem. Again, it creates anxiety. Guy gets naked, can't get hard because he's freaked out. So, and I'll go into the freak out a little bit too. So then there's poor health. You know, poor health, there's a long list of things, and I'll just read off a few here. So it could be anything like, you know, heart disease, clogged blood vessels, increased cholesterol, blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, Parkinson's, tobacco use, booze, enlarged prostate, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So again, what we're looking at here with poor health is if the energy in the body is reduced, if it's compromised in some particular way, sexual reproduction is a low priority. You know, at that point, it's about sustaining the body. It's about sustaining life. It's not about bringing new life into the world. So the energy is diverted from the sexual system into, you know, health, or well, into the body trying to heal itself ultimately. So again, that's why, and it's also a lot of these, that list that I just read off to you, a lot of that list actually are kind of like issues around circulation, you know, things that increase or decrease the pressure of the blood flow, or, you know, any of a number of things. And also there's a couple things in there that interact with nitric oxide in the system, and nitric oxide is necessary in order to create dilation inside the penis so that blood can flow in. So anyway, if you've got certain diseases, you're just going to have to take better care of yourself ultimately. And again, I'll come up with some recommendations when I go over the more positive things here. So now we're looking at drugs. So this is very much linked to the poor health aspect. So drugs, whether they're illegal or they're prescription, drugs are a problem. I mean, I even think about like heroin use. I was talking to somebody recently who was recovering from heroin, and the thing is that the drug itself was so much more pleasurable than the actual sex. So he developed a preference for heroin versus making love. Anyway, it destroyed his relationships. But more than that, it also created kind of a non-functional penis. And so it wasn't until he got off heroin and started doing other things that he was able to then, you know, sort of reinsert himself back into life and back into being intimate. So, and again, a lot of prescription drugs also are linked to erectile dysfunction for various reasons, whether they're, you know, like antidepressants, which kind of mess with your serotonin system, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail into that stuff. But then finally, what I figure is outside of stress, the other thing that I find most universally present is too much ejaculation. Now, too much ejaculation is very dependent on, I guess, the individual. Some men can get away with ejaculating on a regular basis, you know, let's say every day. And it doesn't seem to affect them. And I also think to some extent this may be age related. If a man is younger, he's obviously got more juice to discharge. If he's older, there's just not as much energy. So any depletion, which again, guys, all ejaculations release energy. Just keep that in mind. All ejaculations release energy. It's not just fluid coming out. Again, this is something really, really super basic that we don't necessarily look at as significant, but it's absolute truth. And again, every man is affected differently by ejaculations. And also, we're affected differently by how the energy is discharged. I did a video on magnitude of ejaculation, or magnitude of orgasm rather, and in that video I go a little bit into I guess what happens if the energy is direct in and up versus if I'm looking at, let's say, pornography and I ejaculate and it just goes out. Essentially, I'm ejaculating off into the ethers, into nothing. Whereas if I have a practice, let's say a Taoist practice, I ejaculate, and let's say I lift up my perineum and roll my eyes to the roof of my mouth, energy follows where attention goes. So wherever your attention goes, energy will follow to that point. So if you want the energy to not necessarily, and again, any sort of ejaculation is going to release energy to various extents. So even the little tricks, the Taoist tricks, the tantric tricks, the yogic tricks to get the energy to flow up, they're not necessarily going to prevent all the release, but they can prevent a great deal of it. And it also, the energy then is able to vitalize our systems. So that's too much ejaculation. So next I'm going to go over, I'm going to go a little more depth on the too much ejaculation, just because, like I said, I tend to see this all the time. I mean, I have guys coming to me who are like 26, 27 years old, and and I go through all the factors. Is it stress? Is it trauma? Is it body image issue? Is it poor health? What is it? Like, what are we getting at? And I always end up with the ejaculation question, is how often are you releasing? Some of these guys is like 2-3 times a day, and then they can't get boners, and they're like, I don't understand. It's significant, and I'll get into that in a moment. All right. So what we're going to cover now is what I call the male refractory period. Male refractory time, it's also called. And basically what we're looking at here is it's the time, or I guess we'll just keep it generic. It's the time it takes for a man to recover post-ejaculation, meaning when he's able to go again. So if you're like 17, 18 years old, it's, the estimations are actually rather low. And again, men who are like that young, they have so many more hormones, testosterone, etc., that allow them to recover much quicker, so that they can then have sex again. So there is an acute refractory period and then a chronic. When looking at the chronic refractory period, it's not just the ability of a man to recover in order to have a second sexual experience. It's about when is it that the hormones in his body become rebalanced, which is much more of a concern for those of us who are interested in our vitality, our wellness, and our long-term health, as well as for those of us who are interested in things like meditation and enlightenment and things like that. This is where we have to look at it chronically. I'll ejaculate and the next day I feel perfectly fine, generally speaking. And this is a little bit anecdotal here. So, and granted, I am obviously just me, so I'm speaking for myself. One of the reasons I'm even talking about this is because in my 20s, I had a lot of sexual experiences and it was fine. But basically, I developed a pattern of ejaculating pretty much daily. And it was right around the age of 30 or so, 31, where I noticed, God, I'm just depressed all the time. And I do tend towards depression naturally. It's sort of my disposition tends towards melancholy. And it's not a fault, it's just what I am. Not everyone's supposed to be happy-go-lucky, shiny types of people. Some of us are actually here to be a little more negative. It helps balance things out. So with this, for me though, what ended up happening is that I was chronically depleting myself. So all this depletion of release, and again, it was a habit and a pattern. And I know a lot of psychologists will say, oh, it's good for you. It's good to release and to ejaculate. And I understand where they're coming from. They don't want a man to feel shame about ejaculation or masturbation. And that's fine because it's a pushback against religion and, a lot of cultural norms from yesteryear. However, in contemporary times, we don't have those problems. And I know people like, oh, they still have hang-ups about religion and things like that. It's nowhere near what it used to be, folks. The reality is we have a very permissive culture. We have a huge amount of pornography, a huge amount of access to sexual outlets. So, meaning now we have to have discrimination. We have to make choices. And those choices, at least when we're talking about ejaculation, is to ejaculate or not. It's not about to not have sex. It's about to release or not. So you can have sex. I do it regularly. I have sex, with my partner, and it's regular and it's enjoyable, and her and I enjoy each other, but I don't finish. I have no interest in finishing. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But the reality is what I'm paying attention to, whether I choose to finish or not, is regarding where am I at now? And is the orgasm I'm going to have, is it going to be rich and fulfilling? Or is it just simply feel needed, like I'm a basket case and I need to be able to release? So it is an individual choice. So this idea of chronic, we're going to look at a little curve here I created. So it's an arousal curve. So arousal and then time. So we have arousal on this curve, on this side, and what do they call it, the x-axis, y-axis? I forgot all that stuff. Anyway, point is arousal and time. So, and we'll have this blue line. We'll link that with dopamine. So dopamine, which is right here, dopamine is one of the hormones that make us feel high. It feels good. We like dopamine. Dopamine is what's triggered in a lot of drugs. It's why people like heroin and things like that. So the dopamine system, or the reward system in our bodies, produces this effect with arousal. It increases. It goes up, 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 up. And so when we ejaculate, though, it crashes. Because there's another hormone that's kicked out, which is serotonin, which kind of operates in the opposite direction. So serotonin and dopamine work against each other. Dopamine's arousal, it's stimulation. Serotonin's like, I want to take a nap. So the nap feeling is what many of us feel afterwards. For me, I feel groggy and kind of drunk. So after I ejaculate, it's like groggy and drunk, and I just know that's the effect of serotonin. It makes me feel like bleh. Some people like that. I don't enjoy the feeling. But the most interesting part about this curve, and again, this is all based on research. The research is, it's solid research, but the problem is that we're looking at a lot of different age groups of men, older men, younger men, and obviously this curve is going to be different for different aged men. So what we're looking at here is there's this period of time in which it takes for this dopamine level, or for our hormones, to basically go back up to this dotted line. Now this dotted line is your norm. So obviously this blue curve over the course of one's life goes back and forth over this norm. This norm is pretty much where you should be on an everyday basis. So what ends up happening here is you ejaculate, it drops below the norm, and then it takes some period of time for it to start to build just to get back to norm. Seems reasonable, right? It's, again, any ejaculation is a depletion. Just is. So this journey back towards the norm, now this is the interesting part. Based on the research I have done, it could be anywhere from 2 weeks to a month, just for the hormone levels to go back to norm. You can take that as significant or not. I know a lot of people like, who cares? Who cares? I want my pleasure. Bye-bye. That's fine. Enjoy your 45 seconds. And for those of us who are really lucky to have really strong ejaculations, it may last a minute with like little tremors lasting afterwards. So hey, you get a whole 2 minutes. So a whole 2 minutes of which is extreme pleasure, but it takes about 2 weeks for your body ever to get back to norm in terms of your hormones. So if this hormonal level takes 2 weeks to get back to norm, meaning that we're all kind of functioning suboptimally. Now, how to look at this is simple. So when I discovered this information, I started looking at it a little more intently. One of the things that I found most interesting was is kind of like, if you look at the process of alcoholism, like a lot of men who are drinking and they're alcoholics, even if they haven't admitted it yet, oftentimes they won't acknowledge the fact they're alcoholics until they quit. So once they quit and they go through some period of abstaining, they get to the point where like, oh, holy shit, I feel way different. I feel, it's like the equivalency here is a man pre-cum, post-cum. A man ejaculates, he releases, he feels way different than he did prior. And again, that's acute level, so that's short term. But over the long term, somebody who's doing a habitual pattern, we really don't know how that pattern is really truly impacting us until we stop the pattern. And then we can choose. And again, choice is what life is all about in a lot of ways. From point A to point B, we're in this flow, and it is truly a flow. There's this flow of life force and energy moving through us. And we're being directed for whatever our reasons towards particular things, to have particular lessons and to meet particular goals. The reality is that as we're flowing towards those things, what we're learning ultimately to harmonize with is choice. It's how are we being led to choose so that our life path can be directed towards these things and stuff. So going back to this idea of this like chronic long-term refractory period, again, looking at the idea of an alcoholic doesn't know he's an alcoholic till he quits drinking. And then he has a contrast. So a man who's ejaculating frequently, he needs to stop for some period of time. And I'm going to get into this next section when I go over, again, what should a man do who's suffering from, not premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction. A man who's suffering from erectile dysfunction, what should he do in order to sort of improve the condition? So I think that's all I want to cover on this particular chart right now. So, there's a lot of other biochemistry over here involved with ejaculation. And all these are impactful. We got testosterone, nitric oxide, oxytocin, prolactin, all these different things. Like, for instance, prolactin, which increases post-ejaculation, that's a hormone that makes you feel satiety. So, satisfied. So post-ejaculation, you get increased serotonin, which is sleepy time, and prolactin, which is satiation. All right. So what do we do? What do we do about this issue around erectile dysfunction? So looking at the same factors that I mentioned before, the 6 factors which I find to be very common in men who are suffering from this. And again, we're talking about stress, trauma, body image issues, health in general, drugs, and ejaculation frequency. So, stress. The positive thing you can do about stress, again, all my recommendations are going to be, you have to do shit. I'm sorry, guys. Like, you can't take a pill for this stuff. I mean, you can take, Viagra and Cialis and all those things. If you want to be dependent on those things the rest of your life, that's perfectly fine. Your choice. However, what you can do is you got to change your lifestyle. You got to change how you're living. So, again, a lot of the men who I counsel on this particular issue, they have enormous amounts of stress. The younger men in particular, because, think about how most of us were in our 20s. Just fill up our schedule full as possible just to be busy. At least I'll speak for myself. I think I got like 3-4 hours of sleep for about a decade in my 20s. Anyway, it didn't turn out well. So stress, you gotta make changes. You gotta make some changes in your life. The amount you're working, for the workaholics out there, this is gonna be a problem. But if you wanna have sex, you gotta divert that energy. If all your energy is going towards work focus, it's going to impact you in other ways. So handle your stress. Meditation, yoga, qigong, tai chi, etc., etc., etc. Those are also all very helpful. Making sure you're getting the proper amount of sleep, incredibly helpful. Again, I think you get the theme. Trauma. So trauma, I'm going to once again recommend meditation. Any sort of meditative path, this is incredibly helpful for trauma, because what is trauma? Trauma is your past. It's over, folks. And unfortunately, most of us continue to live as victims of that trauma because we don't know how to let it go. There's a part of the brain called the hippocampus, and the hippocampus puts things on a loop. Now, typically, the hippocampus is a short-term memory center. I'm making broad generalizations here. So it's a short-term memory center, and so what it needs to do every day is to dump out. It needs to empty, which is the function of meditation. Yogi Bhajan made the comment, Yogi Bhajan, who brought Kundalini Yoga to the United States. I remember him saying that meditation was taking out the trash. That's all it is. Meditation is taking out the trash. And what's the trash? The trash are, the accumulated thoughts, the thought forms and feelings and emotions and sensations that you accumulated throughout the course of the day. The thing is it gets stored to some extent. And again, this is part of how growing and learning happens, is that in meditation, these thought forms, you're recalling your day. I know a lot of times the things that I do during the course of my day, I'm too busy in the moment to address them. But there's a lot of growth possibility and a lot of learning possibility if I'm able to address these issues as they rise. However, that's not realistic. I'm engaged in driving, let's say. I need to be driving and not necessarily engaged in my thought forms. So the meditation at the end of my day is incredibly important because it allows my hippocampus to then empty patterns. And so again, this is how your brain deals with mundane level things. So in terms of trauma on, let's say, the level of child molestation or rape or PTSD related symptoms, things like that, anything that's going to be particularly intense and traumatic, those are painful memories. We don't want to look at them necessarily, but the beauty of meditation is that you cultivate the neutral mind. You cultivate objectivity. And when you cultivate objectivity in the neutral mind, it gives you an opportunity to witness these things as they rise. And as they rise, again, you can accept them. And again, accepting doesn't mean ownership. Accepting means, here's that memory, and it just rose. And your body may have an emotional response. And again, that's something else to witness as it rises. And I'm not going to go too much into the details on meditation just because I can probably see you all glazing over as I go into too many details about meditation, which is fine. I get it. But anyway, that's trauma. Meditate, yoga, take care of yourself, go to a shrink, whatever you got to do. Body image. The body image issue, again, is really interesting. I found that the best thing for men to do with body image issues is to get naked a lot, to go to nude events a lot. My body image issues were around being objectification. I didn't want to be looked at, but I did. I wanted to be looked at. I had an issue about who was looking at me, and I had to realize, just get naked. So I started teaching a lot of nude courses. In all the nude classes I started teaching, I was always very, very concerned about being looked at. And then after some period of time, I was like, who cares? Clothes come off, you teach, you're done. And the beauty of that for me is that since I was teaching, it was an environment in which I was in control. I knew that no one was going to make a sexual imposition towards me because that's part of the boundaries that I created while teaching. So I didn't have to worry about those things. I didn't have to worry about, lovers making horrible comments about some aspect of my body or whatever it was. And again, I was hyper insecure about everything in my 20s. So any sort of commentary about even a pimple, you've got a pimple on your forehead and your brow, I would obsess on it. It was retarded. And again, I'm starting to realize that, I'm not alone in this, and a lot of men are carrying around body image issues. So I have a lot of stories about this, actually. I may have to do a whole separate video on body image stuff. But nonetheless, my recommendation, 2 things. Get naked frequently in safe environments. 2 is to find better lovers. Don't get off the apps. Get off the sex apps. Find people who are willing to go in depth with you, to be intimate with you, and to be sensitive with you, and to have open, honest communication with you. And are you going to find it on Tinder? Are you going to find it on Grindr? Wherever it is that people are going to find sex these days. If it's superficial sexual connections you're looking for, you will get superficial partners. So, and not 100% of the time, granted, you could always have this, happy coincidence of meeting somebody off of one of those apps who turns out to be really cool. Something you can cultivate. Again, I'm not saying they're terrible. Again, if you're looking for superficial things, you're going to get superficial people. So, body image. Health. This is where a lot of doing has to happen. Somebody's health choices they make, in terms of diet and, nutrition, diet, what kind of herbs you're taking. Like, again, herbs aren't necessarily essential, but they're helpers. A lot of herbs you can take actually help with some hormonal imbalances that may be related to all the stuff we mentioned earlier in terms of the excess ejaculation and things like that. There are things that you can take to help kind of balance these out. But more so what we're looking at here is the generic things. So generic things related to health are eat better, make sure you're moving, and again, the exercise. So excess exercise is a stressor. Running marathons may kill your sex drive unless you're a natural runner. If you're a natural runner and you move very, very fluidly when you run, and if it's a comfortable thing for you, then it may not impact your health in a negative way. But those of us, like myself, do not get me to run a marathon. I have no problem with it. My legs are really short. Not really short, but they're kind of short. So running long distance to me is not super comfortable. It just feels, and plus it's boring. I don't get it. I prefer to lift weights and things like that. But even with lifting weights, I can overdo it. So overdoing lifting weights, again, is causing excess stress. Excess stress causes your body to shunt energy to other things than your sex. So if you want to have strong erections, you got to be moderate with your exercise. And your dietary patterns, that's a whole separate video, but you need to eat better. Obviously, obesity was one of those health issues I brought up earlier regarding men who have a hard time getting boners. Sometimes there's obesity problem there too. So diabetes, again, a lot of the things I listed on the health issues list, a lot of those are lifestyle based. Heart disease, I know there's genetic predispositions, et cetera, but a lot of them are preventable. So health things, you gotta make some changes. Drugs, I'll keep it real simple here. I don't know shit about pharmaceutical drugs. I do, but that's not my job. So what I recommend with drugs, if you're on illegal drugs, you gotta seek help. It's messing up your boner. And if you're on prescription drugs, you need to talk to your doctor. A lot of antidepressants, for instance, tend to ruin the erection, so that's a problem. So again, talk to your doctor, find out if there's other drugs you can go on that may not impact you in a negative way, and certainly get off the illegal stuff for multiple reasons. Finally, ejaculation frequency. My big recommendation here is you got to, at least initially, I get so much pushback on this. At least initially, cut back. If you're ejaculating every day, cut it back progressively. So start doing every other day. And after you do every other day for a month, cut it back to once a week. After you do once a week, cut it back to once a month. And I know you're laughing your ass off at this point, thinking oh, who's going to go once a month? I will tell you, I felt amazing when I was doing it once a month. I did it for about 3 years, once a month, and I get sloppy now. So, but I'm resetting my discipline as we speak to get back to once a month. The point of doing this for me is when I got to once a month, it built enough internal energy, internal sexual pressure, that I started to have multiple orgasms. And that was astounding. It was something I never thought I could achieve. And yeah, I was doing other tricks. I was learning how to work with my pelvic floor, and I was doing other sort of preparatory things. But the majority of that pressure, that energy, was related to that I had cut back on ejaculation to once a month. So hopefully you got something out of this video. I appreciate you watching. And again, if a couple things, so down below this video, there's my website. Down below this video, there's also a couple other subjects that I brought up during the course of this video that you can find links to. So yeah, I appreciate you watching. Hope all is well.